I never thought a single vibration on a wooden kitchen table could sound like a death knell, but when my phone buzzed at 3:14 a.m., the silence of our cramped, two-bedroom apartment didn't just break, it shattered. I sat there in the dark, staring at an unknown number, while my wife, Sarah, slept soundly next door, exhausted from her double shift at the hospital, and our two kids dreamt of toys we couldn't afford. I picked up that call, expecting a telemarketer or a wrong number, but the voice on the other end didn't ask for money or offer a deal. Instead, they told me that the man I'd hated my entire life, the father who abandoned me when I was 5, had died and left me a legacy that was soaked in blood and secrets. Within 24 hours, my bank account went from having $42 to $42 million, but as I stood in my kitchen clutching a cold cup of coffee, I realized this money wasn't a gift, it was a target on our backs. Was I wrong for taking the money that I knew was dirty just to give my kids a life I never had? Or would you have walked away from a fortune to keep your soul clean? I really need you to listen to this entire story because what happened next didn't just change our lifestyle. It nearly destroyed my family, and I'm still not sure if I made the right choice. To understand how insane this all is, you have to understand where we started. My name is Mark, and for the last 10 years, struggle wasn't just a word, it was my middle name. I worked as a freelance mechanic, mostly fixing rusted-out sedans in people's driveways, because I couldn't afford the overhead of my own shop. Sarah was a nursing assistant, and between her grueling hours and my inconsistent pay, we were the definition of the working poor. We lived in a neighborhood where you didn't go out after dark, and our vacations were trips to the local park with a cooler of homemade sandwiches. I grew up with a single mom who worked 3 jobs until her heart literally gave out when I was 20. My father? He was a ghost. A shadow. All I knew was that he was a businessman who traveled too much, until one day he just never came back. No child support, no letters, nothing. I grew up hating the idea of him, promising myself I'd be the man he wasn't. I was present, I was honest, and I was broke. Every month was a tactical maneuver between paying the electric bill and keeping the fridge stocked enough so the kids wouldn't notice we were skipping meals. I remember one Tuesday night, Maya asked for a specific brand of cereal she'd seen on a commercial, and the look of defeat on Sarah's face when she checked the price tag nearly broke me. We weren't living, we were surviving, holding our breath and hoping no one in the family got sick or that the car didn't break down. But then came that call. The man on the phone identified himself as a legal representative for the estate of Silas Vane. I hadn't heard that name in 30 years. He told me Silas had passed away in a private villa in Switzerland, and that I was the sole heir to his entire liquid and physical estate. At first I laughed. I thought it was a prank, some cruel joke meant to kick a man while he was down. But the lawyer knew things only my father would know. The scar on my left knee from a bike accident, the specific lullaby my mother used to sing. He told me a car would be arriving at 8 a.m. to take me to a private terminal. I didn't wake Sarah. I couldn't. How do you tell your wife, who is currently dreaming about how to stretch $20 for the rest of the week, that we might be billionaires? I waited until the sun came up, and sure enough, a black SUV that cost more than our entire apartment building pulled up to the curb. The neighbors were staring through their blinds as I climbed in, wearing my grease-stained jeans and a faded t-shirt. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a glass-walled office in the city, staring at a series of documents that outlined a life of crime I never could have imagined. My father wasn't a businessman. He was a fixer for some of the most powerful and corrupt individuals in the world. He moved money, he erased debts, and he stayed in the shadows. He was a ghost among the elite, the man you called when you had a problem that money couldn't solve, but that money could certainly hide. And now all that shadow money was mine. There were conditions, of course. To claim the inheritance, I had to take over a specific set of consulting accounts. I didn't have to do anything illegal myself, the lawyer explained. I just had to be the figurehead for the trust. I looked at the balance on the screen. $42,600,000. It felt like a video game. It didn't feel real until I walked into a luxury car dealership on the way home and bought a top-of-the-line family SUV with a debit card the lawyer had given me. The salesperson looked at my dirty clothes with such disdain until the transaction cleared instantly. That was the first time I felt the power of the money, and God, it felt good. When I pulled into our gravel driveway in that $100,000 car, Sarah was standing on the porch, looking terrified. She thought I'd stolen it, or that I'd finally snapped under the pressure of our debt. I walked up to her, took her hands, and told her everything. We cried together on that porch, not out of joy, but out of sheer, overwhelming shock. For the first week, it was like a dream. We paid off our debts, bought a house in a gated community, and put the kids in the best private school in the state. I bought Sarah the diamond ring I could never afford when we got married. We went from wondering if we could afford eggs to hiring a private chef who prepared meals we couldn't even pronounce. But as the weeks went by, the consulting part of the inheritance started to creep in. I started getting emails from people who didn't use names, only numbers. They talked about assets that needed to be moved and investments that required my signature. I tried to ignore the feeling in my gut that this money was covered in someone else's misery. Every time I signed a document, I felt a piece of my soul chipping away. I saw names on those lists that I recognized from the evening news. Politicians, CEOs, people who were supposed to be the pillars of society. I realized I was becoming the very thing I had spent my life despising. I was a puppet for a hidden empire. I kept telling myself I was doing it for my kids, for Leo and Maya. I wanted them to have a legacy. I wanted them to never know the hollow feeling of an empty stomach, or the shame of wearing hand-me-down shoes that were 2 sizes too small. But then the first threat arrived. It was a simple envelope left on the windshield of our new car inside our secure, gated community. Inside was a photo of my kids at school and a single sentence. Silas owed us a final favor, and now you are Silas. This is where things got dark. I realized I hadn't just inherited a fortune. I had inherited my father's enemies. I was trapped. If I went to the police, I'd have to admit the source of the money and likely lose everything. Or worse, end up in prison for the things my father had done. If I stayed, I was putting a target on my family. I started seeing the same black sedan following us. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, there it was, a dark, silent sentinel. I stopped sleeping. I spent my nights watching the security feeds on my phone, my thumb hovering over the panic button. I bought a security system that cost more than my old annual salary, but I still felt like a prisoner in my own mansion. Sarah started to notice. She saw the way I jumped at every noise, the way I stopped letting the kids play in the yard. She saw me drinking more than I ever had, staring out the window with a vacant look in my eyes. She begged me to tell her what was happening, but I couldn't. I didn't want her to be an accomplice. I didn't want the light in her eyes to go out when she realized our new life was built on a foundation of blackmail and blood. I felt like I was drowning in gold. I was a poor man who had prayed for a miracle, and when it finally came, it was a curse wrapped in a ribbon. I sat in my home office one night, looking at a transfer request for $5 million to an offshore account I didn't recognize. The instructions were clear. If the money didn't move, my family would experience a loss. I realized then that my father hadn't left me this money out of love. He had left it to me because he needed someone to carry the burden when he was gone. He had trapped me just as he had been trapped. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was a dad who just wanted to protect his kids, but I had accidentally walked into a lion's den. Before I tell you what happened next, and the terrifying way I decided to end this once and for all, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have taken the money and hoped for the best? Or would you have stayed poor and safe? Tell me right now in the comments because I really need to know if I'm the villain or the hero of this story. I decided that night that I wouldn't be a victim like my mother was, and I wouldn't be a coward like my father was. I called the lawyer, the one who gave me the inheritance, and I told him I wanted out. He laughed, a cold, dry sound that echoed through the phone. He told me there was no out, only through. He said the people my father worked for didn't accept resignations. He told me that my children's safety was contingent on my cooperation. That's when I realized the lawyer wasn't just a legal representative. He was the keeper of the cage. So I used the one thing my father gave me that wasn't money, his old journals. I had found them in a hidden wall safe in the villa I'd inherited, but hadn't looked through them until that moment. They were bound in worn leather, the pages filled with my father's frantic, cramped handwriting. In those pages, Silas had recorded everything. Every name, every bribe, every dirty secret of the very people who were now threatening me. He had written down dates, bank account numbers, and locations of physical evidence. He hadn't left me the money to be a fixer. He had left me the leverage to destroy the system he helped build. He was a bad man, but in the end I think he wanted me to be the one to burn it all down. He knew I was different from him. And he knew I would have the courage he lacked. I spent 48 hours straight digitizing those journals, my fingers flying over the scanner as the magnitude of the corruption unfolded before my eyes. I saw evidence of fixed elections, illegal arms deals, and the systematic destruction of rival businesses. I sent copies to 3 different international law firms and a journalist I knew I could trust, someone who had built a career on exposing the untouchables. Then, I sent a blind carbon copy to the anonymous email address that had been threatening me. I told them that if anything happened to me or my family, the files would be released automatically by a dead man's switch. I also told them I was keeping the $42 million as a retirement fee for my silence. It was the biggest gamble of my life. I was bluffing about the dead man's switch, but they didn't know that. I had to make them believe I was just as cold and calculated as Silas Vane was. For 3 days, we sat in that house, doors locked, hearts pounding. I didn't tell Sarah the full extent of the danger, but she saw the gun I kept on the nightstand. Every time the wind rattled the windows, we both flinched. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then on the 4th morning, the black sedan that had been following us was gone. The emails stopped. The lawyer vanished into thin air, his office cleaned out as if he never existed. I had effectively bought our freedom with the very secrets that were supposed to enslave us. But the victory felt hollow. We couldn't stay in that mansion. Every corner of it felt stained by the history of how the money was made. Every expensive painting on the wall felt like it was judging me. We sold it, donated half the money to charities that help families in poverty, and moved to a quiet town where nobody knows our name. We changed our last names. We're still rich, technically, but we live simply. I opened my own shop, a real one this time, where I fix cars because I love it, not because I'm desperate. Sarah teaches at a local community college, helping others find the path out of struggle that we had to fight so hard for. The money is there, tucked away in a series of secure accounts for the kids' future, but I never look at the balance. I don't want to be reminded of the cost. I don't want to think about the people who were hurt so that Silas could build his empire. Looking back, that phone call at 3:14 a.m. was the end of my life as I knew it. And in a way, I'm glad that poor, struggling version of me is gone. But I learned that there is no such thing as easy money. Everything has a price tag, and usually, it's your peace of mind. I spent years wishing for a miracle, but I realized that the real miracle was the love my family had when we were eating sandwiches in the park. We were poor in wealth but rich in spirit. Now we have the wealth, but the spirit feels a little more fragile. We're safe now, or at least as safe as anyone can be, but I still check the locks twice every night, and I still jump when the phone rings at odd hours. I did what I had to do to protect my wife and kids, and I'd do it again, even if it meant dancing with the devil. I look at my kids now, playing in a yard where they don't have to worry about anything, and I tell myself it was worth it. But I'll always wonder if some of that darkness stayed with me, if I'm more like my father than I care to admit. I wonder if one day, someone will come knocking on my door looking for the son of Silas Vane. I hope this story serves as a reminder that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just covering a grave. Money can buy comfort, it can buy security, but it can never buy back the person you were before you knew the truth. If you think I did the right thing by keeping the money and using the secrets to fight back, like this video and let me know your thoughts. If you think I should have turned it all over to the feds from day one and gone back to our old apartment, tell me why in the comments. This was the most terrifying chapter of my life, and sharing it with you all feels like a weight off my shoulders. I want to hear your stories too. Have you ever been faced with a choice that felt impossible? Subscribe for more stories like this, where we dive into the craziest parts of the human experience. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll be reading through them to see what you guys think of my decision. I'll see you all in the next story.